So when I was told that I get Matthew, and I'm just recording, is that right? It's recording. Matthew 8, I was like, what? Some of you know that obviously I wasn't baptized till October 2023, and prior to that, I really didn't read the Bible very much. I had like a children's Bible that my aunt gave me when I was little, and that was about it. I carried a Bible around with me, but I didn't really read it like we do read it here. So for me, these stories were not familiar, and there were these random stories, like you've got a leper, then you've got a Roman centurion, then you've got Peter's mother-in-law, and then these two random guys that kind of want to follow Jesus, and then there's the boat, and then there's some pigs. And I'm like, what is this all about? So Matthew has taken over my life for the last few months in terms of reading it and trying to kind of get my head around it. And so I think I have some slides. So the last 3 weeks we have been up in the mountain, as you guys are now up in the tiered seats. And we were listening to the Sermon on the Mount. So we were learning about the kingdom of heaven, right? And really, what I found myself doing was putting myself in the shoes of sandals of a first century Jew, and listening to what Jesus was saying. So this was like a carpenter's son from Nazareth, and he was saying things like, "You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor, hate your enemy, but I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you," right? Then stuff like, "You shall not commit adultery, but I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven," the kingdom belonging to the lowly and not the poor and religious elite, right? Would have really stirred the pot. Like for a first century Jew, he's just throwing everything at them, and their whole world's been turned around, and everything that they've built their life upon is just like, they're looking at it going, what's real? And so I reckon their minds were very, very scrambled at this stage. And this today, so Matthew 8 is where we kind of pick up where the Sermon on the Mount finishes. The people were amazed at what Jesus had to say, and they've come down the mountain. So we're going to read Matthew 8, 1-3 to start. So I'm going to do it in little bits as we go along, because that's how it makes sense in my head. Reading the whole chapter was like, what? Okay, so Matthew 1-3. When Jesus came down from the mountain, large crowds followed him. And a man with leprosy came to him and bowed down before him and said, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." Jesus reached out with his hand and touched him, saying, "I am willing, be cleansed." And immediately his leprosy was cleansed. So let's just stop there for a moment. Jesus came down from the mountain, right? And Matthew's original audience would have instinctively known this, because the mountains represented the heavens, which is God's realm, and then there's earth, which is the messy side of life that we all kind of live in, right? So the horizontal plane where we all struggle. And then he kind of encounters this leper. The leper asks him for cleansing, and he's willing, and Jesus responded. So I'm just going off on a sidetrack for a little moment, okay? So I grew up in Malaysia, and we had very strange bedtime stories. So my mum and dad used to tell me bedtime stories of how the Japanese people used to torture people during the Second World War, right? I can tell you all the torture equipment and the technique they use. I mean, like, what were my parents thinking about? Bedtime stories. It wasn't Cinderella or fairy tales. It was torture during the Second World War, right? So those are one thing. Then my grandma used to feed us stories like, you can't cut your nails at night, because if you cut your nails at night, the evil spirits are going to come torment you and you could potentially die, right? So you can imagine as a child, you're like, I'm not going to cut my nails at night. My mum also used to take us, Sunday mornings was not church for me, Sunday mornings was the wet market. So she used to take us and we'd always go to the chicken person who sells chicken, right? We would go to the chicken store first, and my mum would pick out the chickens she wanted. And you can imagine I was little, and they'd pull out the chicken and literally slit the throat in front of me, in front of the children. And then it got chucked in the steamer, so the feathers would get steamed off, right? In the meantime, you were there at the fishmonger, and you're this high to the thing, and you see fish being gutted and scales flying in your face. So this was like my childhood, okay? It's like trauma or what? And then my mum used to take me to a leprosy colony as well. So when you mention the word leper to me, I'm like, it's really triggering because over and above all of this. So I've got a little video here. This is now only recently closed in the last 10 years ago, of a leprosy colony in Malaysia.
頭就問我公帶我嚟呢度爽一盤醫生牛咯，但係知道我公講佢出去買嘢俾我食嘛，咁佢話講出買叫我喺度等，我出曬喺度等咯。玩嘅。我唔知喎，佢講唔俾我入，我咪唔入咯。驚惹到佢哋，我都冇人惹，佢都唔知惹到我邊個。咁我分氣啊，佢坐我啲床位啊，坐到瞓咗一日嘅，先話攞去掉咯。咁我睇到攞掉，我咪走翻嚟咯。睇到咁樣，自己都激心啊！自己阿媽、阿婆都驚佢哋，咁啲朋友都唔驚，咁樣仲去做咩？我從今日我冇去咯。以前嗰啲醫生唔俾鬥記字呢度，俾姑娘着白衫㗎。你4日一個請佢戴啦，介紹俾我，因為我老公係天主教嘛。後尾我仔就喺姑娘堂神秘宣阿咪湊大㗎啦。
I find it fascinating that reading the story of the leper in the Bible and having been exposed to that as a child, that the segregation happened even in halfway around the world in a Muslim country, right? So, I just think that lepers really have been considered the ultimate outsiders, haven't they? They're the walking dead. They've been separated from community. There's a whole thing going on right now in Malaysia where these children that were given up are trying to reconnect with their parents if their parents are still alive. So leprosy, I know in the Bible, covers different skin conditions. But the one thing that in Luke is obviously a physician, and he describes the man as full of leprosy, covered with leprosy. So I wouldn't have thought you'd be able to shock a doctor in those days, but for him to describe this man as being full and covered with leprosy, chances are he probably was, or he's pretty infectious. He's probably got limbs missing. His wounds are smelling, and he could be even partially blind, right? And so there's all of this, and he's segregated, he's cast out. And yet he must have heard, when he heard about Jesus, the hope in him, I kind of wonder, of actually thinking, could he, will he? But he obviously knew that he could, because when he approached Jesus, he braved the crowd. He braved the crowd to approach the feet of Jesus and say, if you are willing, you can do this for me. So how many of us are brave enough to do that, to approach, the feet of Jesus? The Old Testament obviously associates leprosy with death. Leprosy was also associated with Egypt, because God afflicted the Egyptians with boils when the Pharaoh refused to let Israel go. So there's all this stuff happening, right? It's not just the physical consequences. I mean, we talk about social distancing. Is it 2 meters? But I think in Leviticus, it tells you like the exact measurements of the distancing. And I just think hats off to this person, this man, right, who was brave enough to do that. In Leviticus, it does say that anyone with such a defiling disease must wear torn clothes, let their hair be unkempt, cover the lower part of their face, masking, and cry out, unclean, unclean. As long as they have the disease, they remain unclean. They must live alone and they must live outside the camp. So the law is really clear. You don't really, the leper is unclean, so you don't want to touch the leper because you could get infected, right? And the contamination went from death to life. So it was a death sentence, and there was no cure for leprosy. So to be able to have this person in Jesus that could potentially heal him must be so heartwarming for him. And in the Old Testament, it only describes of 2 leprosy instances that was healed, and that was Miriam in Numbers and also Naaman. Right, so with Miriam, Moses interceded for him, and then in Naaman's healing, he was restored, and it led him to declare that there is no God in all the world except in Israel. So people didn't want to touch this leper. He hasn't been touched probably for years, right? And yet, what does Jesus do? He reaches out and he touches him. And he reaches out and touches him. And the leper becomes cleaned as opposed to Jesus becoming defiled. And it brought to mind for me Isaiah, where I'm going to read for you here. Woe is me, I cried, I'm ruined, for I'm a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty. Then one of the seraphim flew to me with a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with tongs from the altar. With it he touched my mouth and said, see, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away and your sin atoned for. So that's what Jesus has done for this man. And then now that he's clean, Jesus gives him instructions. So going back to Matthew 8:4, Jesus said to him, see that you tell no one, but go, show yourself to the priest and present the offering that Moses commanded as a testimony to them. I was like, Jesus must know. Like, how many people can keep a secret? Right? And if you look in Mark 1, it actually says that he said to him, see that you say nothing to anyone, but go show yourself to the priests and offer your cleansing, what Moses commanded, as a testimony to them. But he went out and began to proclaim it freely and spread the news. Right? He couldn't keep his mouth shut. Could you, though? If you were instantly healed, could you? But Jesus must have known, right, that he's not going to be quiet, and he would actually go out there and just announce it to the world. But Jesus had to, the leper had to go and see the priest, because the priests are the only people that could pronounce him clean. They couldn't heal him, they couldn't cleanse him, but they could pronounce him clean. So, but Jesus was able to do both. So Jesus wanted the man to go and fulfill all this, right? Go to the priest and be announced that he was clean. And it could be that this was the reason that Jesus told him to do that is because it's to cause the entire religious system and the nation to sit up and notice, because now a leper was cleaned. Yeah, a leper was cleansed and the Messiah was here. So there's this whole idea of, like in the Old Testament in Exodus, that you've got the separation, you've got the tabernacle, and then the lepers were kept outside. And now there's Jesus here with us and healing. So it's almost like Jesus is now a mobile tabernacle. So you didn't have to go, he's out there and he is with us, right? So only God can heal leprosy. And so by this leper's testimony, it is really telling us who Jesus actually is. So the question I have for you is, what is your leprosy? What is our leprosy? What makes us feel unclean, untouchable, and disqualified from approaching God? Like, I certainly feel like I'm not worthy standing up here and delivering this. Like we have these thoughts, right? And it may be our past, it may be things that we've done that we can't undo. It could be our present situation that we find ourselves in. It could be that it's shame. But the truth is, Jesus doesn't require us to clean ourselves up first. Right? He doesn't need, like the leper, we just need to come to him as we are and have the courage to ask. That is all we need to do. Okay, so I'll leave that little pocket for you to think about as we move on to the next story, which is from the ultimate religious outsider, we have now got the ultimate ethnic and political outsider with the Roman centurion. So let's read Matthew, so it's 8:5-13. When Jesus entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him begging him and saying, "Lord, my servant is lying paralyzed at home, terribly tormented." And Jesus said to him, "I will come and heal him." But the centurion replied, "Lord, I'm not worthy for you to come under my roof, but just say the word and my servant will be healed. For I also am a man under authority with soldiers under me, and I say to this one, go and he goes, and to another, come and he comes, and to my slave, do this, and he does it." Now when Jesus heard this, he was amazed and said to those who were following, "Truly, I say to you, I have not found such great faith with anyone in Israel. And I say to you that many will come from east and west and recline at the table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the sons of the kingdom will be thrown out into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." And Jesus said to the centurion, "Go, it will be done for you as you have believed." And the servant was healed at that moment. All right, so here's a Roman centurion. So he's a Gentile, and he's like working for the Romans, right, which is the oppressors. So from the Jewish perspective, he's like doubly, what do you say, doubly unclean. Doubly, very, very unclean. Very impure, right? So it must have been, when Jesus is saying this, it must have been a real slap to the insiders, to the Jewish people, because he's now saying that it's an outsider who has more faith than what he's actually seen. But this Roman centurion actually recognizes, he understands something really profound in Jesus, probably been following his story, right? And he recognizes that Jesus acts with divine authority. As he commands the soldiers, they obey. Jesus commands creation, and creation obeys. It's like in Genesis 1, right? When God spoke, creation happened. So when Jesus speaks, healing comes into being. The other thing also is that the centurion doesn't claim worthiness. He doesn't say that I've looked after you guys, I've protected you, and I've built the synagogue and all that kind of stuff. He actually comes to Jesus and says that he is unworthy. He is unworthy. He didn't even say, "I'm a good person," right? Probably wasn't. But but he said, "I'm worthy, but your word alone is enough." Okay, and then Jesus then goes on to say, many will come from the east and west, from all over, and they will start to stream into God's kingdom. The Jews believed at this point that they had guaranteed seats at the table because they were physical descendants of Abraham. But Jesus says that Gentiles, people with no ancestral claim, will have a seat at the table, sharing meals, sharing in fellowship, right, and being family. So those who thought they had an automatic inheritance based on their bloodline are not guaranteed anything and can be cast out. So Jesus did a complete reversal of Jewish expectations, right? He's really messing with their heads. So faith, not ethnicity, determines inclusion. The kingdom is universal, it's not tribal. So God's people will come from all nations, not just Israel. Insiders can become outsiders. Outsiders can become insiders. So how does that story apply to us? The only thing that matters really is faith, right? Religious privilege doesn't save us. Cultural, part-time, pick-and-mix Christianity doesn't save us. Having Christian parents doesn't save us. Baptism doesn't save us. I kind of feel a bit like, man, I'm taking you down this hole. The only thing that matters is faith, and faith that recognizes Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, right? He has the authority, okay? And it all depends on his words. So then from here, where do we go? Where does Matthew take us? He takes it into Peter's home to his mother-in-law. So in verses 14 to 17, when Jesus comes into Peter's home, he saw his mother-in-law lying sick in bed with a fever. He touched her hand, so he's touching again, and the fever left her, and she got up and waited on him. Now when evening came, they brought him many who were demon-possessed, and he cast out the spirits with a word and healed all who were ill. This happened so that what was spoken through Isaiah the prophet would be fulfilled. He himself took our illnesses and carried away our diseases. So we move from outsiders to insiders, so into the inner circle. Once again, as I said, Jesus touches, he takes her hand, the fever leaves her straight away. But what does she do? She gets up straight away and serves him. It's not like, I don't know about you, but when I've met you, when you get man flu, you kind of like... you start feeling better, and then you think, oh, I'll just have another day in bed, and I'll kind of just stay, nicely tucked up. But she got up straight away and served. And perhaps the story here, the message that Matthew's trying to bring across is that the proper response to Jesus' healing is not just gratitude, but service. Service that leads to discipleship. Yeah. And then in the evening, Matthew continues, they brought him all these people that were demon-possessed and sick and everything else, and he healed them all. So the key word there for me is all. All right, so this is the scandal of grace, that Jesus welcomes everyone who comes. Everyone who comes. Lepers, centurions, sick women, demon-possessed, all are healed. All right, so Matthew quoted Isaiah 53, and the whole idea here is that Jesus' healing ministry isn't about demonstrating power. It's about taking our sickness, taking our sin upon himself. Just as the Passover lamb in Exodus took Israel's judgment, just as the scapegoat bore Israel's sins into wilderness, Jesus is bearing our disease, our brokenness, our death. The Exodus story liberated Israel from Egypt. Now Jesus says it's for all people, Jews and Gentiles, outsiders, insiders, the sick and the demon-possessed, all are welcomed and all can be healed. So ultimately, however you've been healed, or whatever healing you're going through, healing leads to service. So maybe he's healed you from addiction, depression, broken relationship. Are you serving him? Are we serving him, or are we just happy to have peace? Peter's mother-in-law shows us the pattern, right? Healing leads to service. Jesus touches your life. He heals our lives. He heals our brokenness, and the natural response really is to rise and to serve. She didn't lie in bed for another day. She didn't wait till she felt better, right? She didn't even wait till she processed what happens. And I think sometimes we live in our heads too much. All right? She didn't say, thank you, I'll just have rest now and enjoy my healing. She got up and served. And I think that then follows on, because from service, it leads into the next story, which is really about discipleship. In verses 18 to 22, now when Jesus saw a crowd around him, he gave orders to depart to the other side of the sea. Then a scribe came to him and said, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." And Jesus said to him, "The foxes have holes and the birds of the sky have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." And then another of the disciples said to him, "Lord, allow me first to go and bury my father." And Jesus said to him, "Follow me and let the dead bury their own dead." Now these are two would-be disciples, right? One, I'm reading that and I'm thinking, gosh, he's just been in this crowd. He's listened to, Jesus speak, and his world has been rocked, and he's probably got caught up with the buzz of it all, and he's like, yes! And he calls him teacher. We know Jesus is more than a teacher. And he's caught up with the buzz, and he says, "I'll follow you everywhere." And I think Jesus is like just checking with him. Are you sure? Do you know what you're signing up for here? Because coming with me is not easy. It's not going to be easy. The second one says, let me bury my father first. It kind of feels like he's sitting on a fence. He's like, kind of, I just need a little bit more time. I'm not so sure just yet, so I'll kind of stay sitting on the fence for a little bit longer. So it's easy to say that we'll follow Jesus. It's actually harder to do it. All right, whereas Peter's mother just got up and just did it. So which one are you? Are you enthusiastic about, Jesus and unprepared for the cost? Or are we interested in Jesus but waiting for a more convenient time? I'll just sit on the fence for a little bit longer. Not sure if I want to dip my toe in. Maybe not. All right? But Jesus is laying his cards on the table and, about the cost of following him. So he's done all this. So he's got these two guys that he's dealt with. And then the next story is like he's going to take his disciples out to show them the real cost of actually following him. I kind of think if he's had all these people and he's been healing people, he's probably just gone, oh, look, there's a boat. I'll have a bit of peace and quiet and go off and pray, right? And I'll just take my disciples with me. Now, I found this little video. I don't know if you know. Some of you have been. I've never been. I'm Malaysian, so I'm not allowed to enter Israel, by the way. It's on my passport. But this is a video of the Sea of Galilee.
The Sea of Galilee is known to be particularly prone to sudden storms, abruptly changing character due to its low geographic position in a valley surrounded by hills. Even the most seasoned seafarer trembles at the first clap of thunder on the horizon. Unpredictable, volatile, irrational. The force of a tempest can turn a freighter into a child's bath toy, tossing and turning the vessel at the leisure of wind-blown whitecaps.
How big were those boats in those days? I don't think they were very big. Were they 25 feet or something like that? I don't like being on a ferry, let alone, wanting to go out in one of those. So in verses 23 to 27, when he got into the boat, his disciples followed him, and behold, a violent storm developed on the sea, so that the boat was being covered by the waves. But Jesus himself was asleep. I'd be vomiting, I think. And they came to him and woke him, saying, "Save us, Lord, we're perishing." And he said to them, "Why are you afraid, you men of little faith?" Then he got up and rebuked the winds and the sea, and it became perfectly calm. The men were amazed and said, "What kind of man is this, that even the winds and the sea obey him?" Right, so here Jesus has been doing all these like healing and miracles surrounded by people. He wants a little bit of downtime, gets in the boat, right? And we know that for the ancient Near East view of the world, the sea was not a vacation destination, right? It's a hostile, uncontrollable force. And in the Old Testament, the sea represents everything opposed to God's ordered creation. It represented chaos, anti-creation forces, okay, and often personified by monsters and spiritual powers. And here Jesus says, and he gets up and he calms everything. And I kind of look through the Old Testament, right? And God is the only person that has power over the chaotic seas. Only God can speak to chaos and command its obedience. So you've got Psalm 65:7. Who stills the roaring seas, the roaring of their waves and the turmoil of the nations? In Psalm 89, you rule the surging of the sea. When its waves rise, you calm them. Psalm 107, he caused the storm to be still so that the waves of the sea were hushed. And Nahum, he rebukes the sea and it dries up. So the Greek word used by Matthew epitomao, however you pronounce it. It means to rebuke. And it seems Matthew also uses the exact same words later on when he rebukes demons. So he's using the same word with the sea as he does with demons. All right, so this is Matthew making the claim that Jesus treats all chaotic forces of nature the same way he treats demonic powers. Rebellious forces that must submit to divine authority. All right, so when Jesus stands up and he's doing like what seems to probably an exorcism, I can imagine the disciples there going like they're literally pooing in their pants, really, because they're kind of like thinking, what is this? What's going on? They've seen all these miracles happen and they still can't believe it. They've seen him heal a leper with touch, okay, heal a paralyzed servant with just a word, and Peter's mother, and they've seen all this, and yet they panic, and in their panic they're like, we're going to drown, save us, right? So their fear really reveals their lack of understanding. And Matthew wants us to see that Jesus is not just a man, that he is Yahweh himself in the flesh. Okay, he's the one that sets the boundaries to the sea at creation, and he's now in a boat with them, demonstrating the same authority. So, what chaos are you facing right now? What chaos are we facing? What storms are threatening our boat? Money, health, relationship, job, the state of the world as it is. So the question isn't whether Jesus can calm the storm in our lives, right? The question is, do we believe that he's in the boat with us? Because it might feel like he's not, but he's probably sleeping underneath, I don't know, boats, underneath the bow, I don't know. Ask the sailors in the room. But he could be that we feel like we're alone, but he's actually asleep. And he actually says, little faith, not no faith. So the question here is whether is our faith enough? We don't need to have huge faith. We need to have just enough to be able to wake him up. All right, I'm going into the last story now, right? All these little bits and pieces. So the last story is, in verses 28 to 34, they land on the other side. So when he came to the other side, into the country of the Gadarenes, 2 demon-possessed men confronted him as they were coming out of the tombs. They were so extremely violent that no one could pass by that way. And they cried out, saying, "What business do you have with us, Son of God? Have you come here to torment us before time?" Now there was a herd of many pigs feeding at a distance from them. And the demons begged him, saying, "If you are going to cast us out, send us into the herd of pigs." And he said to them, "Go." And they came out, went into the pigs, and behold, the whole herd rushed down the steep bank into the sea and drowned in the waters. And the herdsmen ran away. They went to the city and reported everything, including what had happened to the demon-possessed man. And behold, the whole city came out to meet Jesus. And when they saw him, they pleaded with him to leave their region. So Jesus crossed the sea. He's passed through chaos. He arrives wherever this Gadarenes, this place. And he's immediately confronted with these 2 men, right, living in the tombs. And the tombs are the realm of death itself. But the demons, recognized Jesus straight away. What business do you have with the Son of God? They knew he was the Son of God. The demons knew exactly who he was. So isn't it ironic that the disciples didn't? They're like, who is he? What sort of man is this? But the demons knew straight away. If we look at Luke as well, he writes about 1 demon-possessed man, not 2. And when Jesus asks his name, he replies, Legion. So legion is a Roman military term, and a Roman legion consisted of 4,000 to 6,000 soldiers. Okay, they were the backbone of Rome's military might and the enforcers of their occupation in Israel. In Mark chapter 5, it says that there were about 2,000 pigs in that herd. Okay, so whilst on one level it's about personal demonic oppression, this could be really about the enemy's power oppressing God's people. So the legion enters the pigs and they rush headlong into a sea and drown. As a vegan, there's like 2,000 babes that have just like dived off a cliff and died. So where have we actually seen this before? Okay, so we're kind of coming into land. In Exodus. Then the Lord said to Moses, reach out with your hand over the sea so that the waters may come back over the Egyptians, over their chariots and their horsemen. So Moses reached out with his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its normal state at daybreak, while the Egyptians were fleeing right into it. Then the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. The waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen. Pharaoh's entire army that had gone into the sea after them, not even one of them remained. Egypt's army drowned in the sea. So this is about liberation from all oppressive powers, sin, death, demons. Jesus is demonstrating authority over all the realms, yeah? And the tombs cannot hold those he liberates. So just to wrap up, when we were praying outside just now, before we came in here, what was laid on my heart was the fact that they might seem like these are different stories, but isn't that how our life is? A patchwork of different stories, and we kind of feel like they're not correlated. This thing happens here, that thing happens here, and yet God's hand is on it all, right? He's the common thread through all of it. I'm not quite as much of a geek as Matt is, but I kind of did this as a summary for. All right. So on the brown boxes, it's Exodus, and then that's Matthew 8 on the other side. All right. So you've got the realm of the mountain, where you had Mount Sinai, the Torah, the tabernacle instructions, and then in Matthew 8 you've got Sermon on the Mount. There's a new Torah. Jesus is the tabernacle. Then we got the second realm, which is on earth. It's about human life, disease, division, defilement. So here lepers were outcasts, Gentiles excluded, right? Defilement spreads outwards. Whereas here in Matthew 8, Jesus, it's holiness that flows out, right? He bore our diseases. And then finally, realm 3, which is the sea. Israel passes through the Red Sea. It's about liberation from oppression. And then here you had 2,000 babes that got drowned, punched to their death. That just overtook my head, being a vegan. So basically, Jesus is, that's what Matthew wants us to recognize, is that Jesus is the Son of God. Okay, so, oh, you want to go back? So, what legions occupy you? And it's not the oppressive forces sometimes, it's also the pigs. What do the pigs represent? No, apart from babe, right? The pigs represent its economy, isn't it? Its wealth. It's like for the farmers, they have now lost their money, how they live, and how many of us are hooked up, and we're so focused on the pigs in our lives. That just sounds so wrong from a vegan to say that, right? We're more caught up with losing that. And because they lost it, they cast Jesus out. Rather than actually say, look, you freed us. You freed these men. You've liberated us from death, from the tombs. They're more caught up with the pigs that they've lost, okay? So freedom can be expensive, but how many of us do the same? Okay, Jesus offers us liberation, but we prefer our comfortable bondage. Yeah, and last week, I was also going to say that last week, Matthew 7 talks about the narrow gate. Entering through the narrow gate, the gate is wide, the way is broad, right? But the gate is narrow, and the way is constricted that leads to life, and there are few who find it. So there are all these rules and regulations and the 10 Commandments and all this stuff, right? The thing is, Jesus wants us to know that we can't do it on our own. He's done it for us. He's already done it for us, right? And so all we really need to do is to let go. Let go and surrender, for want of a better word, to him, rather than keep carrying our burdens, right? So he's already borne our diseases, our sins, our judgment. Isaiah 53 promised it, and Matthew 8 shows it. Okay, so what is required by the Son of God is discipleship. And discipleship requires total surrender. I think it's easy to be a part-time Christian, someone who just take all the good stuff from the Bible and just ignore the rest, And so it's hard. It's hard to be a disciple for someone who take the cross up daily. Israel had to leave Egypt, leave everything behind to trust God, but many grumbled and many wanted to return. In Matthew 8, they cast him out, okay? So, question is, will you draw closer to the Son of God? So please stand, everybody. Let's worship team can come up. Prayer ministry team, if you could come up front as well. So just kind of close this off. So will you draw close to the Son of God? Will you come to him with your leprosy, your shame, your uncleanness? Will you recognize that you are not worthy, that his word alone is sufficient? Will you rise and serve like Peter's mother-in-law? Will you let him cast out your legion, whatever occupies and oppresses you? So I'm looking up at you guys, and it kind of feels like you're up on the tiers. You're still up on the mount. You're still up there in the Sermon on the Mount, okay? So if you're looking, if you're wondering, if you're doubting, the kingdom of heaven is here. Jesus, Emmanuel, is here with us in the nooks and crannies of our messy lives. So will you continue to be a part-time spectator or a full-time disciple? The invitation is open. So the invitation, I'm inviting you to come down off the mountain and be here in the messiness, on the level plane. And if you're unsure, come anyway. Come for prayer. Come stand here with me. Stand at the cross, right? Jesus is here with us. His grace is sufficient for us. For we can do all this through him who gives us strength. Not by might, by power, but by his Spirit. So do come for prayer, come and stand. And I'll just close as Jenny comes up. So Lord Jesus, you touch the untouchable, you calm the uncalmable, and you conquer the unconquerable. We confess that we often live afraid of your power, preferring our familiar bondage. So help us to follow you as true disciples and not part-time Christians. Give us faith like the centurion, courage like the leper, and hearts like Peter's mother-in-law. Give us peace in the storm, and lead us from bondage to freedom. For you alone are worthy of our worship, our trust, and our whole lives. In your beautiful name we pray. Amen.